and start recording. Happy Unit 9 live session, everybody. Good to see all of you. More of you starting to come into the live session as we speak. This week, we're going to finish up all of our conversations around arguments from authority that we began 2 weeks ago. It's been a minute, and we're doing all of last week. We're going to finish up our conversation around news sources, finish up our conversation around scientific sources, which scientific sources are trusty, which ones are shady. And then we're going to learn about one final new type of argument. It's called abductive arguments. I'm psyched for that. We're going to have a lot of interesting, weird stuff we'll be doing in class today. I think a cahoot's involved at some point in class. I think there's a murder mystery at some point in class. Should be exciting. But we're going to start the way we always do. We're going to take a look at everything happening on Blackboard related to Unit 9 this week. So I'm going to head to course content the way we always do. And in course content, first thing I want to check out, actually, before we head to Unit 9, is this group project folder. Just as a reminder, I want to give you occasional reminders that you have a group project in this class. And it's still a ways away from being due, but it's going to be due some point soon. We're talking about maybe a little bit more than a month, like a month and a week away. And just a reminder for what it is you have to do. You can pull up on this guideline. You want to create some sort of new thing that can be shared online on the specific fallacy your group has been assigned. It can be whatever you want, a video, a Kahoot game, a work of art, a website, a slideshow, a handout, whatever. Try to make something new. These are the groups. As a reminder, hopefully you are working with your groups already to try to work on this. And each group has been assigned one specific fallacy, like David, Emma, and Facundo are on the ad hominem fallacy, Courtney, Corey, Isabel, and Shanae are on popular appeal, etc. If you're not in a group, I think I've assigned everybody into a group, but if you're not in one of those groups, let me know. But otherwise, I just like to occasionally remind you about this. This is something that you have to do, and the due date is not super close, but semesters get, away from you. So just want to give you that reminder. All right, so there's that. Now let's go back to course content and go to the Unit 9 folder. All right, in Unit 9, oops, I don't know what I just did. Here are all the slides we'll use in class today. Here are the readings for class this week, not too much. We've got one reading on abductive arguments, somewhat easily paced, about 5 pages, and a reading on what's called confirmation bias, about 6 pages on that. Not too much reading for class. Some optional extra resources, though, if you want to take a look at any of these. Some real interesting stuff in here. Nice article called The Science of Why We Don't Believe Science right here is a nice one I recommend taking a look at if you are at all interested. It's a decent article. Cool. Let's talk now about your one graded assignment for class this week. It's a participation activity, and it's on what we'll be learning later in class today about abductive arguments. I want you to practice abductive arguments, applying it to a particular life decision. I want you to go through the steps of abductive reasoning. This will make sense when we actually learn about abductive arguments in class today. But the gist is I just want you to fill out all of the stuff here. Choose one of these and then fill out the questions underneath this 2A column right here and the questions underneath this 2B column right here. Not looking for super long answers, just like a sentence or two underneath each. And then same for what's on the second page under planning and running tests. Answer these 2 questions in a couple sentences. Under choosing your preferred option, answer in a sentence or 2 underneath each of these. And just a final reflection, how did these steps of abductive reasoning shape your decision? So Nothing about this is super complicated, I don't think. It's not super intense either. The way I grade participation activities, as a reminder, is based off of whether you complete them or don't complete them. So it's not about being perfect, it's about doing them. And that's worth 40 points. That's everything. That's all you got to do. It's our normal due date of Wednesday. It'll be due Wednesday, November 4th, after Election Day. Who knows if we'll know the results of the election by next Wednesday? Who knows if we'll know the results of the election next Friday in next week's live session? I don't know. We'll find out. We'll be in a whole new world then. All right, so that's everything that I wanted to mention logistically related to Unit 9. Any questions, thoughts, or concerns about anything in this class at this moment? Feel free to write yes in the chat. Feel free to write nope, no questions in the chat. Feel free to hit that raise hand button. I always like to see your hands getting raised. Just unmute yourself. Any questions or concerns at this point? Olivia's got no questions. And that's it. Olivia's our only spokesperson for the day. We've elected Olivia the spokesperson for the class. All right. Cool. All right. So we're going to dive back into our conversation about evaluating news sources. Let's see. There it is. Our slideshow. The last thing we did when we were hanging out in last week's live session was evaluate News Punch as a source. I asked you all to evaluate 3 different sources: News Punch, Snopes, and The New Yorker. And we had finished evaluating News Punch, and our verdict was that seemed to be a shady source. That seems to be a source that many outlets describe as a fake news website. So we wound up going with shady on that one. Let's take a look at Snopes now. I know a bunch of you did the extra credit, where you wound up doing a deeper dive into Snopes and The New Yorker. What did you find out about Snopes? I want to hear from anyone who did the extra credit last week, which is a good number of you. I saw a bunch of extra credit submissions. What did you find out about Snopes? Did you find out it was a good source? Did you like it? Did you find out it was a bad source, unreliable and shady? What was your research on what did your research on Snopes uncover? So Sinead found out that Snopes might be bad, okay? Najwa says you found out it's a blog/gossip site. Isabel says it's a fact-checking website. So you got 3 different interesting perspectives on this. I want to hear more from all 3 of you. So Sinead's saying it's not reliable. Interesting. And Najwa was describing what it is, not necessarily saying whether it's good or bad. Isabel seemingly putting it in a positive light, because the idea of being a fact-checking website suggests that it's a good or possibly decent fact-checking website. Like fact-checking means it cares about the truth in some sort of way. So let's try to base this out. So Sinead says there's something opinion-based about the website. All right. Olivia says it says rumor has it. You'd think that it's not reliable. Yeah, that is a slogan, right underneath of that Snopes on it. We do want to go a little bit beyond that. News Punch's main thing was where mainstream fears to tread. I guess News Punch was trying to say it was somehow not mainstream as a news outlet. Who knows whether that's a good or a bad thing. But let's actually start thinking a little bit about this. Snopes.com, if we actually just look at the website, let's go ahead and do that. Let's see what sort of stuff it's covering, what sort of news it actually covers as news. I'm going to open up a new tab here and just go to Snopes.com. All right. Are there mandatory rules in California for Christmas and Thanksgiving gatherings? Okay. What are some other web stuff here? Something about the Aegean Sea earthquake toppling buildings in Turkey. A video showing a butthole surfing robots. Twitter's trending function going haywire. Were Trump supporters injured by a fire hose in Tampa? There's the California mandatory rooms. Walmart removing guns and ammunition displays at stores. Biden's tax plan meme. Grave misstep seen in the US virus response. Did Trump know the identity of an anonymous administrator insider? Somebody suing a university. Is this the world's oldest cat photo? It's a weird section of news. It just seems like it's covering weird news. So that's interesting. Something you can always do is go to the about source, like what's Snopes all about? And here's a little what is Snopes I'm going to click on. Oh, it just went away when I did that. They say that Snopes brings you fact-checking and original in-depth reporting. Their claim is that they fight misinformation. So they're at least framing themselves as a fact-checking website, the way I was described. Remember, though, there's always a concern when we go to a website itself. That website can make all sorts of claims about itself that might be misleading. A website that's trafficking in fake news is probably not going to say, we're a fake news website in the About Us section. But it seems like there's a lot of articles on like weird news claims, possibly conspiratorial claims going on there. So we don't like doing the About Us page is the short way of saying everything that I was just saying. I would not recommend going to the About Us page as the most reliable source to check anything. Let's take a look at external checks. Remember what we did last week? We just Googled Snopes. Or maybe some of you wanted to Google, is Snopes trustworthy or something like that. So let's see if we can do that right now. See how Snopes is described in other places outside of Snopes itself. Let me go back, gotta find it. Always annoying to find it again. Where'd you go, Snopes? I think I've got to. Okay, that's it. Weird. Okay, it's back. So let's just Google Snopes and see what pops up. So obviously Snopes is the first website. And over here, usually you get the Wikipedia. Let's see what Wikipedia says about Snopes. Snopes, formerly known as the Urban Legends Reference Pages, is a fact-checking website. It has been described as a well-regarded reference for sorting out myths and rumors on the internet. Let's see the citations for that. The Herald Review might have labeled it a well-regarded reference. The Courier might have labeled it that way. We can even check to see if that's correct or not. This is from a newspaper back in 2007, which apparently we can't look at because we don't have a subscription to it, sadly. It looks like you need a subscription to see that site. How about that first one? Companies, another newspaper, another one we can't take a look at. Newspapers have really started to go behind the paywall these days. National Public Radio has done an article on Snopes, saying Snopes debunks myths in cyberspace. This is back in 2005. This is 15 years old at this point, but it seems that there's an interview on National Public Radio with the co-founder of Snopes.com, a guy named David Mickelson. Let's say there's a tab on Wikipedia called Accuracy. A 2009 factcheck.org review of Snopes responses to political rumors regarding back then in 2009, some of the big people were Bush, Palin, Obama, found Snopes to be free from bias in all cases. Interesting. So there's factchecked of Snopes.com. So it looks like we've got an article providing evidence that Snopes is pretty reliable, provided you trust factcheck.org itself. In 2012, this particular newspaper from Florida, a newspaper based in Jacksonville, reported that Snopes urban legends researcher found a consistent effort to provide even-handed analysis, and Snopes cited sources and numerous reputable analyses of its content confirmed its accuracy. So it looks like Wikipedia is trying to position Snopes as a decent, reliable source in this way. So that's something that's at least Snopes has in its favor at this particular point, interestingly enough. So one thing you might have as a complicated wrinkle here is if you Google the phrase, is Snopes trustworthy? Or can I trust Snopes? Or Snopes bias, or this sort of thing, you do in fact find people who criticize Snopes. So if we can go back to our original Google, before we even went to Wikipedia itself, I just wrote in Snopes right here. But look what happens if I type in Snopes and bias. We've got first from Snopes themselves, a claim whether Snopes is biased, and then another one from Snopes, whether Snopes is biased. And then let's see, we've got fact check. We've already went to this fact check. All right. We've got the Wall Street Journal writing something about skepticism beating Snopes as an antidote to fake news. We've got Forbes. We've got something called allsides.com talking about Snopes. We've got these library guides from a bunch of different, it looks like libraries. Like this one is a university, the University of, I don't know, Central Missouri maybe? In this sort of circumstance. Another library, lots of libraries are talking about Snopes being biased. How about Snopes and trustworthy? We've got more of the same sort of stuff going on here. And Facundo's got a particular worry here. Maybe the company promoting Snopes is actually an extension of the same company as Snopes. So we have heard from lots of different organizations here. So Wikipedia seems to be suggesting it. This organization, factcheck.org, a bunch of these libraries seem to be saying nice things about Snopes. Something called mediabiasfactcheck.com. Maybe all of these are secretly owned by all the same company, perhaps. That is something worth considering, Facundo. But it is from a lot of sources. It feels like there's a diversity of sources at this particular point. I know when I've done this sort of search prior to this semester, I used to get articles popping up when I typed, is Snopes trustworthy? Or is Snopes unreliable? Or is Snopes biased? Those sorts of things. I used to get articles like this popping up from like this website called foodbabe.com. Do you trust Snopes? You won't after reading this. There are lots of critics of Snopes out there, like Foodbabe, among others, that write that this particular outlet is incompetent, this particular outlet is biased, this particular outlet is shady in some sort of way. But the complicated wrinkle about this is that it's not clear that those critics themselves are trustworthy. Just because you can find an article or some articles out there claiming that Snopes is biased doesn't mean that those particular sources that are claiming the bias are themselves fair and honest and reliable and trustworthy. So here's an example of National Public Radio saying that this particular source, the Food Babe, might be a fearmonger. In this particular context, maybe that's what's going on. And you have to actually go into the weeds to sort of figure this one out. Probably most of you have never heard of Food Babe in this particular context. I'm guessing more of you have heard of National Public Radio as a leading nonprofit news organization out there. But this is the classic problem we face, and it's somewhat recent. At least the term fake news is itself recent, because once we have this claim that some particular source is fake news, we've got other people who might turn around and say, well, those sources calling me fake news, they're the real fake news. And then it's just this classic he said, she said kind of back and forth. It's just people pointing fingers and saying, I'm not the liar, you're the liar. You're not the liar, we're the liar. These back and forths of that sort. It can be hard to figure out when you can find sources that will discredit any source you look at. It can be hard to figure out the legitimate criticisms from the illegitimate criticisms. So in these sorts of disputes, sometimes what you need is basically your priors, trust in your prior evidence that one source is more trustworthy than the other. I don't know anything about the Food Babe, so I have no reason to think that the Food Babe is trustworthy or really that the Food Babe is shady. But if NPR, a source I already have a little bit more trust in, is telling me there's reason to distrust the Food Babe as a particular source, in particular that NPR is saying that scientists are speaking out against this particular source called the Food Babe, and I have no idea about the Food Babe myself, I might be less willing to trust the Food Babe's criticism. And to just go back into why it is that there might be an article on thefoodbabe.com about whether you should trust Snopes. The origin of this is that Snopes attempted to fact check some particular viral article that appeared on foodbabe.com. And Snopes, through their fact checking, thought that some of the claims in that Food Babe article were unreliable and unsourced and likely to be untrue and misleading. And Food Babe, as a result of this, attempted to discredit Snopes in this game of back and forth. I'm not the fake news, you're the fake news. I'm not being misleading, you're being misleading type of way. So sometimes this is the way that you might want to dispute this. The way to settle this is often by figuring out which sources themselves are more trustworthy. Other times, though, maybe what you have to do is get into the weeds and figure out the content of the dispute. Figure out who actually is saying something that is more credible, that is more reliable, that is more likely to be true. And that's one way to go about settling this. You might essentially want to be asking yourself, rather than should I trust this source or not trust this source, rather than keeping this an argument from authority where we're just judging what they say based off of the qualifications of the people saying it, maybe we should look at their arguments for what they're saying. So it's we no longer have to trust the source. We can just look at the arguments of what they're saying and see whether those arguments hold up or don't hold up. All right, so Wikipedia is another thing we already checked. The verdict in this case seems to be that Snopes is pretty trustworthy, based a lot on what Wikipedia is telling us and a lot of what these other sources are. I do get what some of you saying, like there are these sources, there are these other outlets claiming that Snopes is biased. claiming that Snopes is not credible in this sort of way. And it's all the more these days when there's large groups who are interested in unlikely to be true conspiratorial theories. Those are the exact sort of organizations that are trying to discredit something like Snopes. But for what it's worth, just to give you my own little personal history with Snopes, Snopes has been around for like way too long. It almost predates the internet. It was around in like the late 90s, early 2000s. And it was mostly at that time dedicated to debunking urban legends. As Isabel said earlier in the chat, they apparently specialize in either debunking or spreading urban legends. So I'm talking about those sort of like urban legends you maybe heard of like, oh yeah, like if you go down this road, there's a ghost. And you have to flash your lights 3 times for the ghost to appear, or like the urban legend of the existence of the Jersey Devil, which is a special type of Tasmanian devil that's not from Tasmania, that only lives here in New Jersey. Those sorts of urban legends that aren't true, or maybe some of them actually do turn out to be. Snopes was originally around to just debunk or confirm those sorts of legends. And then, as Snopes started to expand, it got into other types of fact-checking. So it would just fact-check back in the days before Facebook and Twitter. It would fact-check those sorts of email chains that just got forwarded from your grandmom to your uncle to you and 55 other people, where people started spreading this that way. And Snopes would say, hey, is everybody getting this email? This email has got some false stuff in it. Be on the lookout for that. And then more recently, in the past 10 years or so, it started to fact check things that appear on Facebook, things that appear on Twitter, things that seem to go viral from random web sources, random memes, random photographs that get shared all over the place. And the more it did that, the more it waded into political fact-checking. And once you wade into the political fact-checking side of things, you start making assertions that are far more controversial, because any sort of political verdict one way or the other, when you're declaring some sort of meme that's a political meme false or misleading, is going to be more controversial, is going to get the people that you're calling on the side of the misleading source. You're going to say, well, that's biased. They're going to start criticizing Snopes. So Snopes has received a lot of fire, a lot of criticism for just trying to maintain some type of fact-checking legitimacy in this controversial landscape of political ideas and political information on the web. But Snopes didn't have that intention at first. Snopes was it was literally just a couple. The co-founders are that guy David Mickelson and Barbara Mickelson. And it was just a couple that were just interested in the internet in the 90s and interested in these topics of like, they were almost like archivists uncovering folklore at the time. And it's taken on this expansive role. All right, enough about Snopes. Little backstory about that. Let's talk now about the New Yorker. Going next, there it is. We are on the New Yorker right now. So what did you all think about the New Yorker, for those of you who checked? Did you find that trustworthy? Did you find that shady? What do you think? What's going on with the New Yorker? Did you find that trustworthy? Did you find that? What do y'all think? Right. Isabel says it's a magazine, specializes in humor-based or satire content. Isabel thought it was shady. Okay, we got 1 vote for shady so far. Nothing based in what you described makes it sound shady. magazine that uses humor. Okay. Olivia thought trusty. Denzel thought shady. Shantae thought trusty. So we got 50-50 votes right here. 2 for shady, 2 for trusty. Tell us why it was trusty for the trusty people. Tell us why you thought it was shady for the shady people. Should they think she put trusty? Yeah, if you've already submitted your homework or your extra credit, you can forget what it is you did. So Isabel says it seems slightly left skewed. So in that context, she thought it might be biased. Okay, interesting. Okay, so we have a possible bias going on here. Remember our 3 criteria for evaluating arguments from authority. Is it a competent source, likely to know the answer? Is it a sincere source, a source that's not going to lie to you? Is it an unbiased source? That's the third one that Isabel's talking about, a source that doesn't have any distorted judgments. So Shantae says it's biased, but the facts are credible. Interesting. So there's something like what Shantae is suggesting is that there's some sort of competence going on here in that side. Maybe the bias is an issue, but there's a competence going on. All right. Like Shantae says, like it's liberal, but I use credible sources. Okay, interesting. So let's go ahead and keep thinking about this. They got articles on all sorts of stuff, by the way. They do have humorous articles if you go to the New Yorker, but they have articles on like almost any topic. They cover a lot of culture. They cover a lot of basic everyday sort of news stuff. We can actually just go to thenewyorker.com to see what they're covering. So they've got a question and answer with that guy, Noam Chomsky. Noam Chomsky is a noted progressive leftist liberal guy who clearly will criticize Trump. So there's an interview with Chomsky against Trump. There's a CIA cover. This is a big article that seems to be on an interesting news issue. It's a CIA cover-up. And then there's more stuff about the campaign, about the election, more about Trump going down here. Now there's just stuff about like culture stuff. Like this is about a book, a work of fiction. This stuff here is a crossword. This right here, anything labeled shouts and murmurs, is comedy. That's supposed to be a humorous source. I think Megan Amran is one of the funnier people on the planet. Just a side note. So they got all sorts of interesting, weird stuff. They just seem to cover everything. They've got a news section that's just for news. They've got books and culture section. They've got fiction and poetry section, a humor section, a crossword section, all sorts of stuff. All right, and if you do what we've been doing before, checking, just Googling New Yorker, obviously the NewYorker.com comes up first, and then the Wikipedia article on the New Yorker pops up that says it's a weekly magazine featuring journalism, commentary, criticism, essays, fiction, satire. Again, that's what Isabel suggested. Cartoons, poetry. It's been around for a while, since 1925. It publishes almost once a week, not exactly once a week. It focuses on cultural life in New York City. So it seems to be focused on New York City, although it has an international audience. Pop culture is a big thing, eccentric Americana, fiction, short stories, reviews of literature. It's got here, interesting, rigorous fact checking and copy editing. That's interesting. You can go to The Guardian to see this article titled How I Proofread My Way to Philip Roth's Heart. It's been more than 20 years since I became a page okayer, a position that only exists at The New Yorker, where you query proofread pieces and manage them with the editor, the author, a fact checker, a second proofreader until they go to press. And then this is from a TED Talk about somebody who worked as a copy editor and a fact checker on the New Yorker. Every little moment gets picked over by critics. So there's something interestingly rigorous about their fact checking and copy editing going on here in this particular context. And let's see if there's anything about their reliability or accuracy in here. It seems to be more about its history and influence, and then different other sorts of sections of it. within it. So Wikipedia is telling us that it's at very least a well fact-checked, well copy-edited source. It doesn't talk a lot about bias. So let's see if we do one of these like New Yorker bias sorts of things. We could check media bias fact check. Who knows if that's reliable? Allsides.com. Who knows if that's reliable? Adfontesmedia.com. Who knows if that's reliable? Well, checking the New Yorker itself is probably not a great way to go. Same with this. All of these New Yorker. The Washington Post is seeming to suggest there's an article. Who knows if you trust the Washington Post or not? And then a particular library guide or website. Okay, so we've got a lot of things to think of here about the New Yorker on this particular context. I think in general it's a bad idea to Google stuff like, is the New Yorker biased or is the New Yorker trustworthy? So I'm more likely in my searches to trust what Wikipedia is going with, particularly going down the rabbit hole of the citations listed in Wikipedia. So in this particular case, I like a lot of the analysis that y'all put forward here, particularly. Oh, Sinead, I just noticed that you wrote that you uploaded the wrong extra credit assignment. Don't worry about it, Sinead. Go ahead and upload the right one now, and I'll just take a look at the right one. I like a lot of what Isabel and Shantae in the chat are saying here, that there's a strong source of credibility to what's going on in the New Yorker. But interestingly, because it's covering a lot of what's going on in New York City, it's reflecting the politics and the general sort of perspective of people who live in New York City, AKA New Yorkers. And New Yorkers are far more likely to be liberal than the average citizen in the United States. It's pretty much true of anybody living in large cities. Large cities tend to skew far more liberal to the left, democratic, than the rest of America's population at large. So as a result of that, I think a lot of the general sort of taken for granted perspective of lots of the columns and analysis done by the New Yorker are from a liberal or left perspective. But with that being understood, you could think of this particular source as pretty trusty, knowing that they're coming from that particular perspective, that the facts being put out by their generally just reported news pieces, not their cultural analysis or the like, those news pieces seem to be trustworthy. So I want to talk just in general about features of news outlets don't know about, that just are behind the scenes and sort of hidden, at least hidden to the public, that make news outlets more or less reliable. I want to talk about the factors that make news outlets trustworthy and make other news outlets not so trustworthy. So competence is basically, are these news reporters likely to know the answer to the questions they're trying to write about? And I think one of the bigger things that lots of news organizations, that what you could consider to be mainstream typical journalistic practices, is a practice called multi-sourcing. When you do multi-sourcing, what you do is you don't just trust one source and what that one person is telling you before you put what they're telling you in a news article. You want to get multiple sources confirming the same information, multiple independent sources. So it's not just enough that one person claims they were an eyewitness to this particular event and claims that this is how that event happened. What you need, if you're going to cover that particular event, if you're going to write about it in a typical mainstream news outlet, like the New Yorker or most of the newspapers that you might come in contact with. Newspapers like the Trentonian or the Newark Star Ledger, or the New York Times, or the New York Daily News, or the Philadelphia Inquirer, or the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, or the Los Angeles Times, and the like. Those sorts of organizations use multi-sourcing as a basic given. You need multiple independent sources. Other things go with single sourcing. Single sourcing leads to this sort of stuff. When you trust one single source telling you something, that's one single source could be somebody who themselves is not that reliable. Somebody who says, oh yeah, I found Bigfoot. I totally met Bigfoot and I had a nice friendship with Bigfoot for a while. And he and I would hang out and get drinks pretty much every Thursday afternoon for about 3 years. We got to be really close to each other. One single source could be telling you that, and a single source news outlet will just print that sort of thing. The National Enquirer was famous for this back in the 80s and 90s, for just publishing this sort of any rants for anyone. Anybody wanted to say any weird thing, the National Enquirer would let it go. A mainstream news organization like the New Yorker, like the New York Times, like the Newark Star Ledger, those news outlets would never trust one source saying such an outlandish claim. They have a higher bar, a higher minimum level standard for this. And this is why, in general, one reason why you might think of these mainstream journalistic practices leading to more reliable news is because that leads to more competent results. That leads to you getting a more likely to be accurate picture of what's going on. Also, fact checking happens at some news organizations. So newspapers have some level of fact checking. So every time a newspaper article is written, the reporter will send that article into their editor, and the editor will look over it and read it and edit it. A copy editor, whose mostly job is to like make sure there's no grammar mistakes or anything like that, but also who knows the news business, who knows what's going on, will also edit it based off of these sorts of things. And fact checking is an important aspect behind all of this. So it happens a little bit in newspapers. By the way, as a separate thing, I mentioned last week that I used to work for On the Media, a national public radio media analysis show. I also worked for a little bit at an organization called Reuters. Reuters is not exactly a newspaper, but many, many articles you would see in newspapers are written by Reuters reporters or the Associated Press and Associated Press reporters. Reuters are what are called stringer services. They provide news coverage for any newspaper to use, for any sort of website to buy into and use and reprint. And at Reuters, anytime I would write an article, I would send it to my editor, and my editor would fact check it. My editor maybe would come back to me with questions. We would have a back and forth about it. My editor would maybe edit what I wrote, make it a little bit more concise, make it a little bit clearer, make sure that we were as exact as possible before actually publishing it. On TV news, it's a little bit less typically. So on NBC and CNN and BBC and Fox News and CBS News, MSNBC, all these news organizations, there are producers who work behind the scenes covering these news things, aside from just the reporters you see covering stuff, aside from just the anchors of these news shows. There are producers, but there's often fewer producers per TV news organization than there are editors on newspapers. TV news magazines, the sort of shows that air once a week, will often have way more producers. So I don't know if anybody who's college age watches 60 Minutes. That's that classic old-timey TV show on Sunday nights that like maybe your grandparents love to watch. Probably not even your parents at this stage, because it's a super old institution. It's been around for basically the existence of television. But they have dozens of producers. They get to cover a particular topic over a series of months. They'll let their journalists cover stuff for a long amount of time before they put any of their news on the air. The same's true for shows like 48 Hours or 2020 or some of the shows that air once a week. You even see this on comedy shows, just as a side bit. I don't know how many of you watched Last Week Tonight with John Oliver. It's sort of half a news show and half a comedy show. It's on HBO, and it airs once a week. And its particular reporting side of things, the sort of news / political side of things, is way better fact-checked than any of the daily comedy shows that are out there. Even things that are like trying to cover political stuff, like The Daily Show or others like it. Magazines often have tons of fact checkers. And again, part of this is because magazines have more time between their publications to work on their articles. Newspapers try to publish at least once a day. TV news has to go on in the morning, in the afternoon, in the evening. TV news is always happening. News magazines and magazines in general, they might be weekly or they might be monthly, and they can afford to hire more fact checkers. So we mentioned that this is the sort of standard operating procedure at the New Yorker. They have a particularly high bar. After an article is written, somebody else will come along to independently confirm every single factual claim in an article. So there's an interesting example of this. Daniel Radcliffe, also known as the guy who played Harry Potter, the actor, once spent a day working at the New Yorker as one of these fact checkers. And here's just a quick example of what a fact checker would have to do. In this case, it was Daniel Radcliffe doing it. Hi, Justin, I'm Dan at the New Yorker. Radcliffe began, twiddling a red pencil. Some of these questions are going to feel very boring and prosaic to you, he warned. So bear with me. First off, your surname, is it spelled that way? Got a confirmation that it is. Does the restaurant serve guacamole? Yes, it does. In the dip itself, would it be right to say that there are chilies in adobo and cilantro? Well, there's no adobo, but yes, there is cilantro. Is there a drink you serve there called a paloma? Yes. That drink's a pale pink frothy drink, I believe? Correct. Is brunch at your place, which by the way sounds fantastic, served 7 days a week? Yes. This is all for a very basic, simple one sentence of a profile piece where two people wound up meeting at this particular restaurant. And just in the setup, that person was described as serving, as eating guacamole that had chilies and adobo and cilantro next to a paloma that's a pale pink frothy drink during a brunch that's offered 7 days a week. That simple sentence required all of that fact checking. And this is the sort of painstaking detail that an organization like the New Yorker goes through. All right, so fact checking is a big thing, multi-sourcing and single sourcing. And notice that already leads some different levels of analysis going on here. Newspapers might be somewhat more reliable on the fact checking side. TV news might be a little bit less reliable because it has fewer fact checkers. TV news magazines that only happen once a week might be more reliable. Magazines might be even more reliable as a result of this. Now let's talk about possible sincerity. This is a big one that everybody points out, that lots of news organizations might have an ulterior motive, something that might make them more interested in lying than telling the truth. What might be a motivation, an ulterior motive that a news outlet could have? News is supposed to be about the truth, right? The goal of news is supposed to be saying what's accurate and dispersing information, credible, reliable, accurate information to all readers, watchers, listeners. So what possible ulterior motive could a news outlet have? What could be a motive to lie? Why might a news source not be fully honest? What might be an ulterior motive, y'all? Name a possible ulterior motive of the news. What else does the news care about aside from just telling us the facts? Those are the facts. That's the way it is. Ah, right? Almost in sync. Isabel and Shantae said money. This is a really important aspect of news organizations. Lots of news organizations are in stuff for money. Many news organizations are for profit. And many of those fake news websites that are popping up more recently are focused just on making money. It's less about actively spreading disinformation to try to like sow chaos in the world than it is that that's a way to make money. You can make money by writing sensational information, publishing outlandish claims like Stevie Wonder isn't in fact blind. That's been a long running thing in the National Enquirer, the trying to bolster this conspiracy theory that Stevie Wonder can actually see and isn't blind. Yeah, and Shanae, this is another aspect of basically money. You're doing the fancy spin on it in terms of trading and stocks. If a news organization is a publicly traded entity, then making money is one way to do this. I think clickbait is a main motivator in this day and age. If some particular headline is especially sensational, it's more likely to be spread online. It's more likely to be shared and viewed by a lot of people. And websites love articles that get lots of views, because the more views an article gets, the more an advertiser will pay to have their ad on that particular article that's getting lots and lots of views. So there's this possible money cycle that is a problem. One thing I want to point out about all this money stuff, though, there are some news organizations that aren't about making money. Does anybody know of any non-profit news organizations? What are some news organizations that aren't out there trying to make money, but instead are nonprofits? The way that like the Red Cross is a nonprofit, right? So the Sun, that is not the case. The Sun is not a nonprofit, Denzel. Other examples y'all know of? Nonprofit news organizations. Organizations run not to make a profit. Ooh, the frontier. I don't even know what the frontier is. What do you mean by the frontier? Let me go back. I just did a quick. Oh, Frontier Airline. So that's an airline. That's not a newspaper. I'm going to type in Frontier News now. I'm not finding anything strong about Frontier News. There's Frontier Communications news items, but I don't know what that is. So I'll give you a few examples of public corporations. It's a news website you use for homework once. Yeah, I'm just not familiar with it. Is it frontier.com you're talking about? Yeah, I'm not as familiar with it, but so there are a few organizations that are not for profit. I'm going to list some. Maybe you've heard of PBS, Public Broadcasting. Read frontier.org. Here I'm going to that website. The Illuminating Journalism. I've never heard of this before. I have no idea what it is. Interesting, though. I'm just going down the, checking out the About Us, where they're from. Just a photo of a few people. Voice to the Powerless. It's a nonprofit corporation. operated by the Frontier Media Group. All right. So it is a nonprofit corporation. So that's good to know. It is nonprofit. It's just independent and sort of new. I just don't know a lot about it. So, I don't know how many of you have heard of PBS, but PBS stands for Public Broadcasting. Like, that's where you would go to watch your Sesame Street back in the day. That's where a lot of like the boring shows exist that are a little bit more staid and old-timey, more traditional, less perhaps entertaining. Public broadcasting is totally nonprofit, publicly funded. That's the TV equivalent of what I've been talking about a bunch, NPR. NPR is National Public Radio. National Public Radio is also not for profit. If you want to go to Britain, the BBC, British Broadcasting Corporation, that's public. That's also not profit. That's not for profit. And I'm not saying that every for-profit based news outlet is a bad thing. Lots of the ones we've been talking about already, like Snopes or The New Yorker, those are organizations that I think of as trustworthy. And what they often attempt to do is put a very strict wall separating the money-making side of that company from the newspaper side of that company or the news reporting side of that company. But that can often be easier said in practice than done. And there are lots of organizations like clickbaity websites whose whole goal is to make profit and not to disperse the truth. Let's talk about this bias. This is the big one that everybody talks about, that there might be this sort of political bias worth considering. And I don't know, maybe I could make this bigger. Do I have it bigger as a slide? This is where we can take a look at maybe where the New Yorker exists on this scale. I'm going to see if I can make this bigger for y'all. Gotta find it. Let's see. Here it is. By the way, toward the top at the very middle, you see Reuters, just as a little side note, an organization I used to work for. NPR is near the top, but a little bit to the left, so it skews to the left a little bit. Oh, the New Yorker might not even be on here. But this basically is skewing left and right in terms of conservative and liberal bias. The further left you are, like the furthest left is this website called Wonkat or Palmer Report. The further liberal your perspective is, the further right on here, the more conservative you are. So News Punch is very leaning, conservative leaning. InfoWars is very conservative leaning. American Thinker, twitchy. And then up and down is generally the reliability of these news organizations. So original fact reporting at the top is stuff like AP and Reuters, the Weather Channel, the Denver Post, ABC, NPR, that sort of stuff. And then the further down reliability you get into more analysis, opinion, selective or incompetent storytelling, propaganda, or inaccurate fabricated stuff. So this is one way of thinking about our distinctions here. I think the New Yorker didn't even make it on here, interestingly, unless it's crowded in the middle towards the top somewhere, but I can't see it. I see the New York Times up there, but I can't find the New Yorker. But I feel like the New Yorker would be somewhere around where Vox and Washington Post and HuffPost is, if we were to look that up. Let's see, go back to this. I'll put that back to regular size. So you might have that concern about political bias. One of the nice things about some of the organizations, I'll make it big again. I went too soon to doing this. The nice thing about the organizations that are like somewhere in the in that like of between like 30 and 36.5 of terms of reliability. Things like Jacobin, Slate, Salon, MSNBC, New York Post, the Epoch Times, Newsmax, the Wall Street Journal, Washington Times, is that they let you know their particular slant. They let you know that they're explicitly this type of outlet. Like the Washington Times lets you know that it's a conservative outlet. Jacobin magazine is explicitly for and covering socialism. It's a magazine for socialists. Those sorts of outlets will tell you right away what their position on this stuff is. And that sort of perspective can be helpful when just garnering trust in general. It's one of the reasons why we might think of the New Yorker as somewhat trustworthy. They would be willing to say that many of their news analysis and perspective is coming from a typical New Yorker's perspective, which is similar to a liberal perspective, since New Yorkers are overwhelmingly liberal. Other thing we want to be concerned of is not just the one-sidedness of the news organization itself, but the one-sidedness of us, the news consumer. So this one-sided worldview we're talking about might really be your one-sided worldview. You might be getting all of your news information from only one side of the aisle politically. Maybe you only take in liberal news sources because all the people you're around are liberals, and you're only friends with people who are liberals. You're only following people on Twitter who are liberals. Anybody whose posts you see on Facebook are just liberals posting news articles that are supporting liberal positions. And this is where people talk about echo chamber effects, or being in some sort of media bubble where the only thing you're fed is information that supports and confirms your views, and you're not even being given access to. You're not looking at or engaging with any news sources that go against your worldview. This sort of thing is something that's worth doing. You might be interested in diversifying your news diet. If you yourself are liberal, it might make sense to occasionally be interacting with some of the news sources on the other side of your spectrum. If you're liberal on the left, you might start looking at things like Forbes and Reason and the Washington Examiner and those sorts of other sources, just to see how that might shake up your worldview in this way. Last type of thing I want to talk about are think tanks when it comes to the news anyway. I'm not sure how many of you have heard of think tanks, but they have these sorts of fancy sounding names of the sort you see right here. The Cato Institute, Brookings, Center for American Progress, the Heritage Foundation, AEI, Council on Foreign Relations, the Pew Research Center, the Hoover Institution, the National Bureau of Economic Research. All of these are think tanks that will produce things that look and feel a lot like news. They'll release things that are sort of in between scientific journal articles and news reported articles. A think tank is by and large an organization that winds up pushing a particular agenda. So let's give you an example of something like this. The Cato Institute is one such think tank. And the Cato Institute, in fact, did this back in 2018. The Cato Institute released a study that claims the usual statistics used to back up claims of large wealth inequality in the United States are misleading. So do you think that this is a trustworthy study? Do you buy this? Do you feel like this is trusty? Do you feel like this is shady? Well, a lot of this is going to have to depend on whether you trust or distrust the Cato Institute. And if you're anything like a typical person, you have no idea who or what the Cato Institute is. So it might make sense to look into who or what the Cato Institute is. So let's do the thing we often do. Type in the Cato Institute and see what pops up. Not Cato Fashion, the Cato Institute. So they're based in Washington. It's an American libertarian think tank. Libertarian is a particular type of political position. We can even click on American Libertarian. It's a political philosophy that combines conservative and liberal states. It's economically conservative and liberal when it comes to social issues on personal freedom. So this particular institute, the Cato Institute, is trying to advocate for politically conservative positions that are economically conservative and socially liberal positions. That's what Cato is all about. So when you see a particular article, a particular study, some sort of release by the Cato Institute, you should recognize that there's some possible political underpinnings to that, that they're probably going to be advocating for some sort of libertarian position. And it seems pretty clear here that that's what's going on, because in this particular context, they're talking about wealth inequality, which is some sort of politically liberal position, that wealth inequality is a problem we need to address. And since this Cato Institute is a libertarian organization that advocates for politically, economically conservative positions, it's going to criticize these economically liberal cases. Something like the Innocence Project is another type of think tank whose goal it is to reform the criminal justice system, to reform what's going on in our legal system, in our court system, in our punishment system. Mainly, one of the things they do is advocate for releasing prisoners who are innocent. They try to exonerate people who have been convicted of a crime that they did not, in fact, commit. Well, in this particular context, since the Innocence Project's explicit stated goal is about some sort of criminal justice reform, you might be a little bit wary, a little bit less trustworthy, a little bit more skeptical of Innocence Project's claims about whether this particular form of punishment that is pretty clear they're against, the death penalty, doesn't deter murder. Even if this conclusion happens to be true, the fact that the Innocence Project is telling you that is sort of par for the course. You would expect the Innocence Project to advocate for that, even if they don't, even if it winds up not being true. This is a classic type of bias. An organization like the Innocence Project will probably cherry pick all of the evidence that supports their political position and not include any of the evidence that goes against their political position. In much the same way as the Cato Institute is likely to, either knowingly or unknowingly, through their own possible bias, only use statistics that support their political agenda and not choose the ones that don't support their agenda. So that's another thing to be on the lookout for. Think tanks in general are about promoting one side of an issue. Think tanks in general are worthy of skepticism for that fact and that fact alone. So let's do a couple of things to wrap up our section on new stuff, just see whether we think this is trusty or shady. So let's say you found out this particular meme that's out there. Your friend tells you she read on Facebook that the bluegill is one of America's most dangerous fishes. Do you think this is a trustworthy source? Do you think this is not a trustworthy source? What do you think about this one? Are you going with trusty or shady? What do you think, y'all? Is this trusty? Is this shady? You don't know, one way or the other? A vote for shady. Onel says no idea. So if you got no idea, maybe you can vote I don't know-y on our poll that just popped up. Onel says there's something concerning about this. There's no source going on right here. Well, I can show you what our friend actually read. It is that photo at the very bottom there. This photo has, in fact, been widely shared on Facebook. This photo with a little bit of writing underneath it. The bluegill fish is one of the most dangerous fish in North America. The bluegill is related to the deadly piranha, which is responsible for 20,000 deaths per year. When the bluegill are feeding in a school, they can completely dismantle a human body in less than 15 minutes. Bluegills are responsible for over 500 deaths in the United States every summer. There's a little source at the bottom of that. It says Ohio News, Ohio Fish News, 1987. Most people voting thinks there's something shady about this, and I totally agree. What is the source in this particular circumstance? I like that Onell says, like, wait, what's the source? Like, what is the actual source here? Onell says there's no source, question mark? What is that source? And in this particular case, the way we're receiving it, at least the way your friend's receiving it, it's just the category of on Facebook. This happens a lot, right? I read once on Facebook that, or I saw an article on Facebook that said blah, blah, blah. That's very hard to trust. You want to dig a lot further than that. You know what can get shared on Facebook? Literally freaking anything on the internet, right? You're allowed to share pretty much everything on the internet through Facebook. So on Facebook isn't a consistently reliable category or unreliable. Lots of reliable stuff are shared on Facebook. Lots of unreliable stuff is also shared on Facebook. So could be anything. What we want to do is dive into specific. This one is a particular meme. It's literally a photo of this particular type of fish. Apparently, I don't know what a bluegill actually looks like. Maybe this isn't an actual bluegill. It's a different type of fish. I don't know. But it's a meme with this photo and this writing underneath of it. And on the meme, it lists Ohio Fish News, 1987. Feel free to look up Ohio Fish News. That's a bullshit source. That source does not exist. There's no such thing as the Ohio Fish News. That's just fancy nonsense. So this one is clearly shady. We don't know who made this. Somebody might have made this randomly to just try to get people to believe that the bluegill are dangerous. The actual origin of this is that somebody was trying to show how misinformation can spread rapidly on Facebook. They made what seems to be clearly a false meme. And it is false. A bluegill is just a boring old fish that doesn't do anything dangerous. It's no more or less dangerous than any other fish. It's just a fish that swims around. But they said, oh, I'm going to make a really crappy argument that the bluegill is dangerous. I'm going to include a technically true thing. They're related to piranhas in the same way that like all fish are related to all other fish. Just being fish make them somewhat in the same ballpark, in the same genus. But then there's another lie at the bottom here. Bluegills are responsible for over 500 deaths in the United States every summer. That's wildly implausible and untrue. And so just this little mixture of technically true but misleading and downright false claims, it's the sort of thing that could be shared all over the place. Let's go with this one. What do you think? There's a documentary on Netflix whose main thesis is that child vaccines are dangerous. The source is called Vaxxed. That's the particular documentary. What do you think? Do you think this documentary, Vaxxed, is trusty or shady? I've popped up a new poll. Feel free to vote on this poll, whether you think it's trusty or shady. We got 2 for trusty, 2 for shady. A lot of y'all not voting at this point. We got 4 for shady, 2 for trusty at this point, 0 for I don't know-y, 3 for trusty, 4 for shady, 4 for trusty, 3 for shady, 1 for I don't know-y, 5 for shady, 6 for shady, 7 for shady, 5 for trusty, 1 for I don't know-y. All right, enough of y'all have voted. We'll just show it. More of you think it's shady than trusty, but a number of you are going trusty on this one. Let's hear from our shady people. Why do you think this one is shady? What's possibly shady about this particular source? All you shady people voting shady. Why? Why are you going shady with this source? All right, go ahead and unmute yourself, Olivia. Go ahead, Olivia. Yes. I think you need to repeat this, Olivia. I can hear you, but it's very distorted. Try it again. A little bit. It's still very distorted.
Okay, what do I know?
I'm sorry. You are way too distorted at this point. We are just catching that you're talking. We literally can't hear what you're saying, unfortunately. I'm sorry, Olivia. That's frustrating. Olivia doesn't have to be our lone spokesperson either. As Olivia starts to type her thoughts in the chat, want everybody else to start writing your thoughts in the chat, or you can unmute as well. Perhaps your connection is a little bit more secure. Your microphone is a little bit more secure. Olivia's. Go ahead, Shanae.
You can read Olivia's first, and then I'll.
Okay. So let me read what Olivia said, and then I'll get you to talk. Olivia says, I was saying since it's a documentary, we don't know where their sources are from. This is a really good point. Yeah. So just to get to this, the source isn't Netflix documentary, so we trust it. Netflix documentary is a consistent category. Some Netflix documentaries are the sort that Netflix themselves produced and made in that sort of way, but most of them are just like any sort of documentary that they just like agreed to show on Netflix. And there are all sorts of nice, strong, reliable documentaries on Netflix. And then there are all sorts of shady documentaries on Netflix. And then there are ones that are in the middle where it's like, is this reliable? Is this not reliable? Can be hard to figure out. So go ahead, Shanae.
Okay, so I kind of think this is trusty only because when I look, because I like a lot of documentaries, like so like evidence based, and I feel like a lot of Netflix and Hulu they are trying to put more information out there so that we are able to know what's going on in the world. So I feel like they're bringing it more to an attention. So I don't think that this is shady in a way. I also believe that in real life that child vaccines are very dangerous and they have spoke about it. So I think they're just bringing it more to the public that aren't really watching the news more so.
Good. So I really like what you're saying. And I think there are, in fact, lots of Netflix documentaries that are trustworthy. I'm with you on that for sure. The only thing I've got a concern about is the things that Olivia and Isabel are saying here. We don't know whether this specific documentary on Netflix is one of the trustworthy ones or one of the shady ones. And there are both types. Just like there are good high quality movies on Netflix and a lot of stuff on Netflix maybe you just don't like that aren't for you. There's both types on Netflix. Netflix just has a bunch of random different type of stuff, not only reliable documentaries, but also unreliable ones. And if all I tell you is that this is a documentary that's on Netflix, that's not good enough. We need to get to the source, who the filmmakers are, who produced this film, who are the sources behind this documentary. And Netflix is not that source. Netflix is just where you would go to watch a movie. It's not the source of the movie itself. It would be like saying like, oh yeah, I went to that movie theater so I know that whatever happens at that movie theater is reliable. No, not necessarily. That's just where you watched it. That's not what the source is. So let's actually go into this particular source and try to figure out who made this documentary. And this is where we can get into a little bit more of this. There is a little bit about who made this documentary. It's a guy named Andrew Wakefield, who's an MB/BS, whatever that means. He's an academic gastroenterologist. Ooh, that sounds kind of fancy. He got his medical degree from St. Mary's Hospital Medical School in 1981. So he seems pretty fancy. He's got some competence going on here. He seems like he's got a degree in that sort of thing. But here's where we can go a little bit further on this. And this gets back to some of the things we were talking about earlier. There are going to be these sort of complicated wrinkles of experts on a few different sides. And in this particular case, if you do a little bit of Googling for Andrew Wakefield himself, you'll quickly find out that there are all these news articles about Andrew Wakefield, how he's a quote unquote disgraced British doctor. And he was found guilty of a particular thing back in of 3 charges, including dishonesty, back in like 20 years ago. And the paper that sort of like really sparked a lot of this particular vaccine debate over whether vaccines are dangerous, specifically whether vaccines are linked to child autism, was itself retracted. It was published initially in a scientific article, but later retracted, interestingly. And the Independent itself is a classic, reliable, reputable source, just as a side bit. It's one of the more popular newspapers in London, England. There's the Times of London, the Independent, the Guardian. These are 3 of the bigger newspapers that exist in London. So in this particular case, Andrew Wakefield himself might not be the most reliable source on this particular topic, even though he's got a bunch of credits to his name, a bunch of degrees to his name. There might be reasons to distrust him. And this is going back to that thing we talked about last week, when we've got this dispute between 2 sources, one of whom saying competence, the other who's saying not so competent. We might trust the ones we've got going on here. So The Guardian, another British newspaper I just mentioned is reliable, says that there's this general pushback from the scientific community against this specific film called Vaxxed. The scientific community seems to be uniting against this anti-vaccination film. And again, another trustworthy source in this one. Getting into the actual specifics of the sort that Shanae said about whether child vaccines are dangerous or are not is beyond the scope of this specific article, but this particular documentary seems to be more likely to be unreliable as a result of this, because the source of this particular documentary might not be as credible as we originally gathered or trusted. Part of this is, again, we're dealing with some of these hot button issues, right? If you're at all familiar with this debate, you know that this also is one of those highly politicized types of issues. But this particular source might not be the most reliable source to go to. We want to go to the most trusted sources in this particular circumstance. Let's see here. Go ahead, Facundo.
So sometimes even actual experts are are supposed to be the reliable source, but even they can't be due to certain biases that they have in front of them. For example, Hulu has this documentary called Food Evolution, and they talk about organic versus GMO foods, and they really give a great explanation of both sides in a very interesting way. And they show the evidence from both sides. And there was one doctor who was fighting for organic foods, and he was basically experiments and manipulating data in the sense where he was getting his answers. Like, he would ask a question, then he would force the answer the result he wanted because he was being uh, sponsored by Chipotle in the background, um, in some type of like separate deal. And at the end of the documentary, they actually like expose it and confront him about it, and he kind of just takes off the mics and walks away and like leaves. And it shows like even the people who are supposed to be doing the things sometimes are influenced by other factors that don't allow them to be the most reliable thing, even if they're the primary source.
So I think you're doing a really nice analysis right here. And I want to show you something that was an optional resource last week. I'm going to go back into the Unit 8 content folder. One of the things that you could read as an option last week was this article called Science Isn't Broken. It's just a hell of a lot harder than we give it credit for. And yeah, this is a big thing. We're about to talk about this in much greater detail right now. But science in general can lead to this sort of concern called, people refer to it in science called p-hacking for a particular thing. But look what you can do. Let's say you want to try to figure out whether the US economy is affected by whether Republicans or Democrats are in office. You can try to show whether there's some sort of correlation or connection using actual real data going back to 1948. But look what you can do. Right now, there is no relationship. The result here is almost there, but not exactly what you need. But you can start just clicking with this. Say like, well, what if I don't include governors? I just include senators. What if I include governors and presidents? Okay, maybe not presidents. What if I include representatives? Okay, well, how about I don't care about inflation? Oh, look, I found a publishable result. I just include governors, senators, representatives, not employment and inflation, but I do include GDP and stock prices. Notice if I include inflation again, it's not publishable. I exclude inflation, it's publishable. I add employment, it's still publishable. I take out power, oh, it's more publishable. I don't exclude recessions, all right, great. I remove stock prices, I put in GDP, it winds up changing dramatically. All of these just based off of this. And I can do this, this was all for the Democratic side. I could do the same thing for the Republican side right here. Let me add in governors. Look, it's publishable all of a sudden. Let me include inflation. It's still publishable. Stock prices, still publishable. Get out power, still publishable. So weirdly, in this circumstance, you can yield 1,000 publishable results in all sorts of different directions from 1,800 possible combinations. But they go in both directions. You could do it for Democrats and you could do it for Republicans. And just what people refer to as p-hacking, it's just searching for the answer you're looking for. If you want a particular answer, you can, in some sense, you're not manipulating the data, you're just choosing what data to look at and what data to ignore to get the results you want. Now, I think is a great time for us to switch over to discussing our next big thing, which is scientific sources. So I am going to do a little share slide now for this. So we're going to be following along to these slides, which as always, I can't find. So frustrating. Let me try this again. There it is. And to play along with this, I'm going to create a, I'm not going to create it, I already did create this. I'm going to use a Kahoot. So let me go to it right now. Nope, that's not what I wanted to do. So frustrating there. Nope, still not what I wanted to do. Here we go. All right, Kahoot. I was just on Kahoot. I don't need to upgrade. That's not what I wanted to do. When's the last time y'all played a Kahoot, by the way? Maybe it's been a minute since like middle school. Maybe y'all play Kahoots in school. Ooh, special Halloween edition. I love this theme. So if you've never played a Kahoot before, this is how it works. Nice. Last week, Shanae, you played one? You go to kahoot.it on your phone, or if you don't have another device, you can open another tab and play the Kahoot there. And then, again, the website is kahoot.it right up here. And then you enter the game pin right here, 913-9436. I see you all starting to show up. I'm going to play along as well. We got 8 of us in so far. Happy Halloween, everybody. All right, we're going to give it about 10 more seconds. So join in if you're not there already. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6. Oh, you're there. There you are, Naj. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. We're going. So all you got to do for each one of these is vote trusty or shady. My friend says she read an article on Facebook that said eating chocolate promotes heart health. You going trusty or shady for this one? What do y'all think, everybody? You got 6 seconds left. All right, most of us went shady with this one, and I totally agree. I don't want to get rid of that. I want to just switch over to here. So why do you think this one's shady, y'all? For at least all of you who went with shady. Shanae's like, that's easy. I like it. Why'd y'all go with shady? So Shanae's saying it's not reliable. What specifically is reliable about this one? All right, Najwa, good. It's Facebook. Remember the thing we've already said about Facebook. We've got concerns whenever we're dealing with Facebook. So I'm going to try to toggle back and forth between these slides. Here's that same article we were just saying. It's on Facebook. That's not so great. Oh, I guess I didn't have. I guess I can skip these slides. I didn't put stuff on this yet. All right. So basically, it's the same thing we were saying before. Just because you read it on Facebook doesn't mean we even know the source yet. What was the actual source? Facebook isn't the source. And by the way, Monique's also got this concern. We're dealing with, again, anecdotal evidence. She herself, your friend, could be lying. That's a concern we've got going on right here. All right, let's check the results of our Kahoot. Who's in first place? All right, Shanae's in first. Facundo very close by, below with 958. Isabel close, Shantae's close, and Amanda very, very near on this one. But if you don't know how this works, the faster you get your results in, the higher your score is. All right, nice job. Let's do this next one. According to a Science Daily article, there's a study that supports the claim that eating chocolate promotes heart health. What do y'all think on this one? Oh yeah, I gotta play too. Ooh, this one was a little bit more controversial. Much more of you went with trusty on this one. I think this one is also shady, y'all. I think this one is also worth being concerned about. And now I can actually start talking about this one. I will go back to our slideshow to discuss this. Why, for those of you who went with shady, did you go with shady in this particular circumstance? The 5 of you who got this one right, why did you say shady? Because I'm with you. I think the right answer on this one is possibly shady in this circumstance. It's a Science Daily article. Why don't you trust it? Najwa says Science Daily is like a mini Wikipedia. Is it? I'm not sure I would fully describe it as a mini Wikipedia. Website. So in that sense, it's like Wikipedia. Makuna says the data still needs to be interpreted by someone else. So yeah, this is still not talking to the scientists themselves who've done the study. Science Daily is a place where journalists report on scientific articles. We talk about interesting scientific articles that are out there. This is, again, a step removed in this sort of way. Franco says there's an exclusive broadcast. I'm not exactly sure what you mean by that, Franco. But here's a sort of concern here. When we're trying to evaluate whether a study is trustworthy or not, we want to be really close to the study. The further away we are, the further removed we are from the study, the worse it is. So we suffer from possible hearsay effects, whisper down the lane effects, people telling another person who then distorts it and tells a third person, who distorts it and tells a fourth person, and so on and so forth. So a lot of the news we see about science winds up being broken when it reaches our particular news outlets. The actual research that gets done at the very top makes a particular strong claim, a particular specific claim. A is correlated with B. Remember our discussion of causal arguments from earlier this semester? A correlation is not necessarily a causal claim, just a correlation that these things occur together. At least given C, assuming D and under conditions of E. It's very specific, it's very contained, this particular conclusion. Well, very few people actually read those news articles. Rather, what happens is that scientific article gets picked up by the university's public relations office that releases a little bit of blurb about that study. And notice what they say: scientists find a potential link between A and B under these certain circumstances. They're still trying to be careful in that case, but they're being a little bit less careful. Potential link is a little bit of a stronger claim than A is correlated with B at this level of analysis. And then this is where newswires like the sort that I just said I work for, like Reuters or the Associated Press, may pick it up, and they simplify it even more. And they say, well, A causes B, according to scientists. That's not what that article said. That article mentioned a correlation, and now the newswires are jumping to the causal conclusion that A causes B. And then once it's picked up by news organizations, this is where the internet pops up and says like, oh my gosh, scientists are out to kill us again. Or A causes B all the time. What does this mean for Obama? Just sort of now picking it on randomly. Science Daily exists at this level. That's where the internet is picking this sort of stuff up. It's not the original research. Science Daily is not the public relations firm emailing out a news blast. Science Daily is the internet. And then cable news and local news pick it up, and look what they wind up doing. What you don't know about A can kill you. More at 11. And then a typical person who might just be watching the news says, I heard A is out to kill us, so I'm going to try to do what I can to ward off A. All of this is a problem. We don't want all of these steps between ourselves and the study. We don't want the study to go through all of these filters. The press release, the journalist, another journalist, a one-sided source, a friend who then tells you. We want to cut out all of these middle management things and just go directly from the study to ourselves. We want to just see what the study itself says whenever we're going with these sorts of news things. All right, so let's now check this particular article out. We're going to go back to our Kahoot, see who's currently in the lead after 2 rounds. Let's see. Nope. Now Naj has jumped to the lead with Monique. Uh-oh, I'm in third place, y'all. I am Prof. Shanae and Facundo stay in the top 5, but they've moved down a little bit. All right, we're ready for our next one. Let's go ahead and vote on this article. Trusty or shady? A study in Heart supports the claim that eating a small amount of chocolate negatively correlates with heart disease. What do y'all think? What should the proper conclusion be now in this one? 3 seconds, y'all. All right, most of you got the right conclusion here. So in this case, you only want to conclude exactly what the study says. You don't want any more or any less than exactly what the study is telling us. Whoops, I just wanted to get rid of these. I didn't want to remove all of that. So that's an important clarifier here. But you oftentimes wind up saying, yeah, of course, Shanae, I cheated, by the way, because I made this. So I'm not trying to win this. I'm just trying to play along for fun. But going back to what we were saying here, you'll oftentimes see people make this sort of claim. Here's exactly what the study said. Eating a small amount of chocolate each day negatively correlates with heart disease. People will jump to the conclusion that's a cause and effect conclusion. Eating chocolate promotes heart health. No, that's not the right conclusion. The right conclusion to draw from this is that there's a negative correlation between eating some chocolate daily and heart disease. And even if there is this sort of negative correlation, we don't necessarily have to explain it in terms of cause and effect. This is a correlation that could be due to a common cause. This is a correlation that maybe we've got reversed. We flip the cause and we flip the effect. This is a correlation that maybe isn't genuine at all. Maybe it's merely coincidental that the data happen to line up randomly this way. Not due by random chance, not by actual cause and effect. So all of these are the sorts of concerns we have in this circumstance. All right, time to move on. We're going to discuss who's currently in the lead for the Kahoot. Let's see who our leader is. Wow, Naj is on fire. 3 in a row. Loving it. Ooh, I'm in second place now. William is climbing the ladder up to 3rd. Monique is staying in there. And Franco, I think this is our first appearance of Franco in the top 5 as well. Good job, y'all. Let's see if we can try out this next one. A study in heart supports the claim that eating a small amount of chocolate negatively correlates with heart disease. Now in this one, we're just going to see if this one's trusty or this one's shady. Do y'all trust this source now? Do you like it? Do you not like it? What do y'all think? Ooh, only one person went with shady, and gasp alert time. Say what? Shady, I think, is still the right answer. What? Are you kidding me? What? What do you think's going on here? I want to hear from our shady voter why you voted shady. So Shantae says, well, it's a study, so why don't you just put trust? I think this is a really good point, right? By the way, I'm not the one who voted for shady. Even I voted for trusty. I just voted because I figured all the rest of you would vote for trusty as well. I was anticipating none of y'all would get this one, but I'm impressed that even one of you did it. So this is really interesting. So I want to hear from our person for why this is the case. Why did you do it? So Franco says that he made the wrong choice. Interesting. Did you make the wrong choice that wound up being right? But here's a real concern that I have about science. This is one of the more advanced things we'll be learning in this class. I worry about any one study that people put out there. And any one study in a particular scientific field is not nearly as reliable as all the studies combined. When we're dealing with brand new science, frontier science, when we're at this precipice on the boundary between what we already know and what we don't know but are trying to figure out, we are prone to error. We're prone to a lot of trial and error. Just trying something out, thinking we're on the right path, thinking something's promising, and then only realizing after further research is done that, oh, that's not that reliable. And this is exactly what happens that makes us see all sorts of weird claims that are these scientifically backed claims in the news. The weirder a study is, the more surprising a study is, the more likely it is that us people out there in the world who aren't scientists will hear about it because it will be reported on the news. This is one that made the rounds a while ago. Female hurricanes are deadlier than male hurricanes. That is, hurricanes with female names are deadlier than hurricanes with male names. So you know some of the more popular hurricanes, not popular in terms of like everybody likes them, but more well-known hurricanes out there are hurricanes like Hurricane Katrina. And that hurricane has a female name. Katrina is a female name. Or like Hurricane Hugo back in the 90s, I think, was another big one. That's a male name. Interestingly, one of the bigger ones around us in the past 10 years or so is Hurricane Sandy. I bet many of you remember when Hurricane Sandy hit us. I don't know whether Hurricane Sandy would be classified as a female name or a male name. That would fit under either in that circumstance. So this is basically what I'm saying here. Surprising headlines are great, but oftentimes after there's more research, you wind up realizing, oh, that surprise actually isn't true. We did more research on it and we wound up not being able to replicate that original finding. We wound up not being able to find out that that really is the case. But by that point, it's already too late. The news has already gotten out there. The news has already made a big one. What we care about, rather than any one new study, we should care about replicated, settled results. The stuff you find in a boring old textbook, the sort of stuff you would just read in your biology textbook, or read in your psychology textbook, or your physics textbook, or your genetics textbook. Go ahead, Olivia. So in this particular case, the boring stuff from science is often settled, is often just there and ready to be understood. Go ahead, Facundo, unmute yourself.
This kind of reminds me of the idea of a certain study that was retracted a couple years ago with regards to GMO rats, with regards to rats being fed GMO food. And basically, the study had a certain strain of rat, which was going to get cancer regardless of what you fed it, whether it was water or the base.
Oh, you cut off. Could you say the last sentence you just said, Facundo? You cut off.
That basically the strain of rat that they use was prone to have large tumors and cancer, and they put a photo of a rat with giant tumors across its entire body, showing like this rat was fed GMO food, and like kind of implying that this would happen to us as well. And the media went crazy on it. It went around and it was dispersed everywhere. And the science community then retracted that piece of literature. So it was proven incorrect. And the thing is that since it was already spread around everywhere, it didn't really like remove that type of knowledge from the community, and it didn't get pushed that it was retracted as heavily as it did when it first came out. Like, damage was already done by the time the science community said like, no, this is wrong.
That's a really good example, Facundo. And as a matter of fact, this is exactly what happened in this particular study at Hart. I don't know if anybody can see the graphic in this particular slide right here from this journal Heart. The journal Heart is a very trusted, reliable organization, just to be fully clear about this. I think that source is generally a reliable source. But this thing that made the rounds all over the place, there's a correction to it. An update from this original article in 2018 wound up correcting a lot of things that happened here. But you know what didn't make the news rounds? A correction on an earlier article. Nobody published that in newspapers or magazines or on NPR or the like. The only thing that really picked up in a lot of news organizations was the original article that was like, wait a minute, are you implying that if I eat chocolate, I'm going to be healthier? Are you saying chocolate makes me healthier? Sweet, I better eat some chocolate. Chocolate's now good for me. Chocolate might help me fight heart disease, which is itself an incredibly surprising and likely to be highly implausible claim. If it's true, we're going to want lots of studies supporting it. And this is only one study. When we're only dealing with that one study, that's a problem. We shouldn't deal with one study. We should deal with multiple studies. A lot of studies. A meta-analysis is looking at several different studies and seeing the general patterns in all of those scientific studies. Looking at 100 articles on heart health, looking at hundreds of articles on genetically modified organisms, that sort of thing. So with that in mind, let's go back to the Kahoot. I wonder if we'll see who our lone winner is just from our standings. Let's see who's in the lead now. Must have been William, the only one who got it right. Even I didn't put the right answer in on purpose. So William has climbed up to second place, still hasn't overtaken Najwa for the lead. But let's see if we can go on in this one to our next one. This article study complains women named hurricanes are deadlier than man-named ones. We were just talking about. Do you think this one study is trusty? Do you think this one study is shady? What do y'all think in this circumstance? Lock in your votes, y'all. All right, good. You're learning the lessons of what's going on here. Most of y'all voted for shady in this circumstance for the very reasons we were just describing earlier. It's one single study. What I want to trust is not just one single study, but all the studies that are out there. And there isn't a lot of research on this particular topic. It's such a weird one. But the results since then have not correlated strongly with that. That's most likely to be a coincidental correlation at best. Let's see who we've got. Change in the lead. Okay, we've got two newcomers at 4 and 5. Court is now in 4th place, and Facundo has jumped up into 5th place. Naj, William, and me are still rounding out the top 3 here. Let's try this next one, y'all. According to most biology textbooks, eating foods with lots of added sugars and sodium increase the risk of heart disease. Biology textbooks, trusty? Biology textbooks, shady? What do y'all think? Five seconds left for y'all to vote. All right, most of you got this one right. Because we're dealing with textbooks, those are the settled results, the boring results of science that we've already figured out. They used to be controversial results. We didn't know this at one point in the history of the world, but science has done a good job of settling this. And this is one reason to be suspicious of a new article that goes against accepted wisdom. Yes, science sometimes upsets settled wisdom, established conventions, but to actually fully upset that settled wisdom, you need lots of studies, not just one individual study. In this case, most biology textbooks are more likely to be correct than any one single study. Sure, sometimes that lone wolf, that single study out there might be right and the entire scientific community might be wrong, but more likely than not, the consensus among the scientific community is likely to be correct. More likely, anyway. All right, so let's see if it's changed. Yep, I dropped out of the top 5. I got that one wrong on purpose. Court is making a big run now, jumping up in place. Facundo right behind Court. Isabel's in the top 5. William maintaining spots in number 5. All right, let's move on to this next one. Physicist Steve Jones put out a study that claims that the plane crashes on 9/11 weren't enough to cause the towers to collapse. Trusty or shady, y'all? All right, y'all got full shady on this one. Excellent. Why is this one shady? For sure, this is like a conspiratorial claim, right? The plane crashes didn't cause 9/11. So you might be suspicious of this. But look, it came from a study. This is the study right at the bottom there. Why indeed did the World Trade Center buildings completely collapse? All right. So we got a lot of people saying nice, interesting examples here. One, Isabel, it's just one study. Don't trust one study and one study alone. Shantae is pointing out he's a physicist. You'd think physics would be relevant to this, but you know there are actually more relevant experts on this. There are engineers, structural engineers, whose job it is to build buildings and make sure those buildings stay upright despite lots and lots of resistance. Those are probably more relevant experts. This one particular physicist is more likely to be wrong than the rest of the scientific community saying otherwise. So again, this is not a good idea to trust one study. Instead, we should trust multiple studies. We should trust the accumulation of scientific evidence, not any single lone wolf. And I like what Facundo mentions in the chat. You might not be likely to reproduce what's going on there. All right, back to the Kahoot for another one. Let's see if our leads change. We got it right. Nope, just Isabel got in a little faster than Facundo. So Isabel is now in 3rd place. Climbing, climbing, climbing. I like it. All right, let's try this next one, y'all. Actor Terrence Howard claims he has a mathematical proof 1 times 1 equals 2. I feel like most of us think 1 times 1 equals 1, but Terrence Howard thinks he can prove that 1 times 1 equals 2. What do y'all think? Yeah, most of y'all went with shady on this one. I agree. What's shady going on here, y'all? Why do you think this one's shady? Maybe this one's easier than even what we've been saying here. Why are you going shady on this one? All right, so he's an actor, right? So actors are not necessarily likely to know the answer on math. Bill didn't read. William, you didn't read. That's okay. So in this particular case, we want to trust consensus, not lone wolf experts. By the way, Terrence Howard does have a degree in either physics or math. I forget what it is. So he has a little bit of expertise. Like he has studied this a little bit. But he's literally the only one on the planet, I think, who you could find claiming that 1 times 1 is 2. Not that 1 times 1 equals 1, the way every one of us learned it and was taught and believes. So this side of claim is much, much less reliable than widely agreed upon experts. We want to trust the consensus among the people who are likely to know. Even though on any issue you're very likely to get 100% consensus, getting something like 97% consensus, 91% consensus, 93% consensus is more reliable. Facundo, go ahead.
So I was listening to a podcast and I forgot exactly. I think it was this podcast called like Science Versus, and they were talking about how one of the presidents were shot in the back and they were taken to a to like a hospital, and they basically had the best surgeon or the best doctor in the U.S. and he was doing things like his way, and he was doing a whole bunch of things trying to figure out how to find the bullet. They even had like Thomas Edison like come in and try to create like the first metal detector. But like the bed was like a spring bed, so the detector was going off everywhere instead of just where the bullet was. And um, they ended up killing the president just because he didn't understand the concept of sterility. Like it wasn't well known across, like a global consensus, because the idea was like these little microscopic things of germs that we can never see, is unreal to them back then. And there was a doctor from Ireland who sent them in the mail like a message, a piece of advice talking about this concept of sterility, and that he needs to basically clean utensils and stuff because he was like going in with his bare hands to try to find the bullet. And the president basically just had like giant infections across his entire body, which ended up killing him because they didn't understand the concept of sterility. And this idea, like he read the piece of mail and he laughed at it. When in reality that uh, the idea that was like the abstract concept at the moment was the truth. And it was hard to get around, but after a while, and then that became the norm, after the new generation of younger doctors and scientists kind of accepted it and like begin to implement it into the practices, data started to speak for itself, and became accepted as the new norm. But it's that first initial jump that even if this is the truth, just because it is a consensus, sometimes it can be pushed back and like ignored.
Yeah. You've done a very nice job of explaining how science works in general. I really like this. And the example you give is from the show called Science Versus that you just mentioned. There's a link to the show if you want to listen to it. It's one of the first ones they ever put out. It's a great episode. And you're right, at the start, there are going to be some lone wolves who get it right. So I don't want to make fun of these lone wolves, that they're all Terrence Howards out there by making these wacky claims. Einstein is a great example of a lone wolf who wound up eventually being right. He wound up completely upending the way we understand physics entirely. And he was the first and only person to be advocating for it at the start. But eventually, as more and more people started to agree with him, as more and more evidence started to accumulate, more and more scientists started to switch their perspective, switch their opinion, and wound up agreeing with Einstein. That's the scientific process working. In the same way that sterilizing, basically making sure your tools that you use during a surgery are clean, is something that wasn't widely practiced back in the 1800s and now is widely practiced today. And that's seen as an improvement. When it was first on the scene, when there was one lone wolf advocating for it, it's hard to figure out whether that lone wolf is correct or incorrect. By and large, for every one of these doctors who are advocating for sterile instruments before anyone else, for every Einstein who's getting it right, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of other lone wolves who are wrong. So that's the sort of puzzle about when you can or can't trust these lone wolves. More often than not, a lone wolf is wrong, but there are still lone wolves who get it right, and hopefully science catches on and eventually winds up agreeing through the scientific process, through the evidence-based process with which it works. So well put, Facundo. I do highly recommend exactly what he said, listening to that. I was trying to quickly find the article itself, but I struggled finding it. So let's go ahead and try some of our final Kahoots. Let's see who's in the lead after this one. Monique has cracked the top 5. Nobody else has changed, though. We still got Najwa in the top, officially on fire. Court and Isabel close behind. Facundo, there's a real cluster right around 5,300 in Court, Isabel, and Facundo. So nice job, y'all. All right, let's check out question number 9. 91 to 97% of climatology studies on climate change support global warming. Say global warming is real. Is this trusty? Is this shady? What do y'all think? Trying to reconnect. I don't think I'm going to be able to connect. Okay, I got my answer in finally. All right, everyone who voted gave it all trusty for the very reason we just talked about. That's consensus. Again, there might be somebody who comes along, one of those rare lone wolves who say, you know what, this whole global warming thing is a mistake, and I think this is misleading. And by the way, there are scientists out there who say that. It's a very, very small minority of people. And one of them might wind up turning out to be right. And hopefully through the whole scientific process of how science works, we can find that out. But for now, who are you going to trust? 99% of the scientists out there or 1% of the relevant scientists? On that sort of overwhelming consensus, it seems that it makes more sense to trust the large group of scientists who are all on one side than the few people who are on the other side. Probably we won't get much change going on here. Oh, no, Franco has jumped up into 5th place. Good job, Franco. Yeah, and there is something interesting. We're dealing with often political issues, right? We're specifically now talking about global warming, where the scientific consensus is almost unanimous, but the general population might be deeply divided over whether global warming is real or not real, right? There might be a real big difference among the general public on this controversial, highly politicized issue of global warming. But the science, at least, is all on one side, or mostly on one side. Yeah, and you're right, Onel, science isn't founded on popularity, but what we're trusting in this case is scientists' judgment of the evidence, because we're essentially a step removed. If we really want to care about whether climate change is real, global warming is real or not, we probably should do more than just trust the scientists. We probably should dig into the topic ourselves and become relevant experts ourselves. But if we're not going to do that, our next best guess, our next best judgment is to trust the consensus of people who have devoted their lives to studying this. So this is what I would refer to as a relevant popular appeal in this circumstance. You want to check the percentages of the people who study this and where their stance is. We can become an expert ourselves for sure, but absent that, when we have to trust the scientific sources, when we want to trust the scientific sources and not look it up ourselves, this is our next best option. And Onel, the whole idea about why it is that's trustworthy is we're trusting that the scientists themselves are looking at the evidence. The scientists themselves are judging, forming their opinions based off of the evidence that they have around them. I think it's actually amazing to think about that. I am not an expert on climate science. I am not an expert on genetically modified food. I am not somebody who's looked into all of these things myself. I have put a lot of trust in scientists who by and large tell me what they think is the answer on these. And since I'm that further step removed, I can only trust whether the scientists are telling me is reliable or not. So I need to check the reliability of the scientists myself. It's kind of fascinating how much we're removed from all of the scientific claims we think we know. I don't think I could give you a scientific argument for climate change. I can't tell you the underlying causal mechanisms beyond the sort of basic story that we're all heard of, that sort of story that carbon emissions from things like our cars somehow wind up trapping gas into our ozone, and that leads to this sort of greenhouse effect that winds up making our planet a little bit hotter because the ozone is somehow built up more. If you ask me to say more than that, I'm kind of lost. But that's just a story I've learned to parrot from scientists who have tried to tell me what's going on. Go ahead, Denzel, unmute yourself.
Oh no, my brother was just messing around with my mic. Sorry.
Oh, that's okay. There's an accident. Maybe your brother wants to speak up. If so, go ahead, but otherwise we'll move on. All right, we got 2 more of these to check out. Sorry, technically 3, sorry. Studies support the claim that there's a correlation between eating genetically engineered corn and lower fertility. We got a study making this claim that genetically engineered food is bad in some sort of way. You trust this one? You find this one shady? What do y'all think? Awesome. Why is this one shady? I buy that this is shady for sure. Why? Sorry, Shantae, you keep getting kicked out of the game. Because we're not playing it right away. Sorry about that. We're taking these breaks in between to talk about them each time. Why is this study shady, y'all? Why'd you go with shady? Yes, Franco's got the important word here. We don't care about one study. We care about multiple studies, plural. We don't care about what one scientist or what one team of scientists is putting out there. We care about multiple studies. And Olivia, in this particular case, we can think of multiple studies as like a meta-analysis of all the relevant studies among the experts on this particular case. So one lone study is not going to be good enough. Just a little bit of back and forth between Facundo and Isabel. I feel like our 3 people in the middle here are doing a nice job of staying close to each other. Let's go on to this one now. Analysis of more than 3,000 studies finds that genetically modified food is not riskier than non-genetically modified food. Do you trust these studies? Do you not trust them? What do y'all think? Five seconds. All right, this one was a little bit more mixed. Few of you found this one shady. I think this one is much more trustworthy, mainly because it's so many studies in this particular circumstance. Look at the difference in this particular 2 right here. You've got one lone result that GMOs are harmful over the established consensus. 180 scientific institutions, more than 3,000 studies, a meta-analysis of 21 years of field data and all different variety of studies seem to suggest GMOs are safe and GMOs are helpful. And this, again, is another one of those things that has turned into a political issue. So in the general population, there is this like widespread division over whether genetically modified food is safe or whether genetically modified food is not safe. But the scientific community, at least, the people who are relevant experts trying to figure out this, are concluding that GMOs are safe and GMOs are helpful. So again, if you're going to just trust the scientists on this one, you want to trust the majority of scientists. And the vast majority of scientists on genetic modifications of food suggest that it's totally safe. All right, we got one more to do in our Kahoot, and then we will call it. We'll be finished with our Kahooty Hoot. Let's see here. First, our results. Maybe they've changed. Okay, we got Shanae cracking the top 5 again. Isabel Facundo jumping a spot. Feels like nobody's able to catch Najwa, though. I feel like we haven't discussed her enough lately. She's been like a wire-to-wire leader. Will somebody unseat Najwa in this final one? Let's find out. Our final question in here. This study suggests that gaining weight increases the chance your friends gain weight. A 2000 study from the New England Journal of Medicine suggests that basically obesity is contagious. All right, a bunch of you went with shady. I think you're learning the ropes here. The main issue with this one is that it's just one study. The more outlandish the claim that obesity is contagious, the less likely you want to trust one individual study. To really, really provide evidence for this sort of weird claim that obesity is contagious, you want more than just one study. You want multiple studies over years and years, teams and teams and teams of scientists leading to such a strong claim. And now we're at the end of here. Let's see who is our winner. Check out our podium. In third place, Isabel. Congratulations, Isabel. Second place, we got Court. Good job, Court. And you know, you trusted her. It's Najwa in first place. Shanae and Facundo wound up being runners up. Good job. I'm going to give everybody who placed extra credit. So good job to Najwa, Courtney, and Isabel for getting first place on this one. First, second, and third, I suppose. Awesome. I guess I've got to turn off my Kahoot now, unless you want to just keep hearing this sweet music. Good job, everybody. All right, so that's going to be the end of our section on science and news. The main thing to take away that it feels like y'all are learning through this is that one individual study is not itself a good, reliable source. Science is a great source, but science is a community-wide project, and you want to trust scientists in general, not necessarily any one individual scientist or any one individual result. Thank you for bowing, Najwa. Thank you for giving credit, Facundo, to Najwa's glory. Did a really nice job. All right, we are more behind schedule than I would have anticipated, which I think is totally fine. But we were supposed to get to discussing abductive arguments today, but since it's 11:47 and we've been at this for a little bit more than 2 hours, I want to just call it for the day. I still want you to do this particular assignment, but I'm going to postpone this week's assignment. Just a reminder what this assignment was. If we can go back to Blackboard, back in Unit 9. Where did Unit 9 go? I've got to find Unit 9 again. Your assignment was supposed to be, if we can get to it, to do this particular participation activity on abductive reasoning. Well, since we are not getting to abductive arguments today, I am going to push this back and make this a Unit 10 participation activity. You're seeing me do it on the fly itself, except wait, am I doing it? I think I didn't edit the right thing. I am not going to make this due on Wednesday anymore. I'm going to push this back 1 week, so it's going to be due next week. So don't worry about this. You actually have 0 graded assignments for class this week. Don't worry at all about this particular assignment. You got nothing. You got nothing, you got nothing, you got nothing for this particular week. And with that, we're going to end class, y'all. I think this is a very nice class. I appreciate all your comments, your feedback, your discussions of things. I think you did a great job on the, I can't even remember. Oh, the Kahoot. My brain is getting broken right now. Have yourselves a great weekend, everybody. I will see you all next Friday. Good weekend. Enjoy.